I spoke this morning to Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg about Barnaby's comments about the choice between manufacturing or zero net emissions, and about today, which is, of course, International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Well, joining me now is the Federal Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Yesterday was Australia Day. We had all the arguments about that, but there's no argument about today. January 27th is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Josh, your parents came out to Australia. Your mum escaped the Holocaust. Bet she never thought she was coming to a land where her son would be the Federal Treasurer and maybe even Prime Minister one day.
Well, certainly the dreams of the survivors have been realised by the great opportunity that they've been presented here in Australia. We're a country of freedom, we're a country of tolerance, we're a country of diversity, and we provided a safe haven for around 27,000 Holocaust survivors, with only around 1,000 left today, Rowan, because as time passes, their numbers dwindle. That's why it's so important that we remember on Holocaust Remembrance Day what transpired in that very dark chapter in world history, when there was a crime not just against the Jewish people, but a crime against humanity, with people who were disabled, political and religious prisoners, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, the Roma, Sinti were all killed by the brutal Nazi killing machine, as well as 6 million Jews and, tragically, heartbreakingly, 1.5 million Jewish children. And if a minute's silence, Rowan, was observed for every Jewish victim of the Holocaust, that silence would go for 11 years. A chilling fact, and a reminder of the scale of that atrocity.
Josh, we've seen outbreaks of anti-Semitism in the last 12 months, particularly you warned last year about far-right extremism. This year we've seen far-left extremism. In LA, for example, during the Black Lives Matter riots, Jewish shops were targeted with anti-Semitic slogans, windows smashed and so on. Gilets jaunes in France, again, far-left groups with very anti-Semitic views, some of them. And of course in the UK we saw similarly Black Lives Matter riots, which were pretty grotesque in their anti-Semitic approach. What is the warning there for Australia and for the world about the far left?
Well, anti-Semitism tragically is on the rise, not just here in Australia, but around the world. And it's a function of ignorance. It's a function of a lack of understanding and empathy and learning the lessons of history. So it's really important that we reinvest in Holocaust education as one aspect of that strategy, and that's why establishing Holocaust museums around the country is so important. And the federal government under Scott Morrison has partnered with the Western Australian government, the Queensland government, the South Australian government, the ACT government, in order to promote Holocaust remembrance and Holocaust education. And as you know, both in New South Wales and in Victoria, there are established museums with testimonies, with exhibits, with literature, which can be provided to school children so that they understand what actually transpired, so that we all say never again.
Sydney Jewish Museum is certainly terrific. They all do a great, great job. Josh, now, there was an IMF report today about the world's economy. So give us some good news. We've battled through COVID. The vaccine's around the corner. What's the news on the economic outlook?
Well, Rowan, the news for the Australian economy is that the recovery is well underway and the jobs are coming back. And we're seeing that in the economic data from across the economy. We saw unemployment fall to 6.6%, bearing in mind that Treasury were forecasting potential unemployment at 15% if programs like JobKeeper and the other economic supports did not flow. We saw 50,000 new jobs created last month. More than 70% of those were full-time, and around 90% of the 1.3 million Australians who either lost their jobs or saw their working hours reduced to zero at the start of the pandemic are now back at work. Now, it's going to be a hard road ahead. The vaccine is being rolled out. That's good news, although it's not the silver bullet that everyone may hope it is. But we need to be vigilant. We need to understand this is primarily a health crisis with a very significant economic impact. But certainly the trend has been our friend with respect to the economy. And the IMF has said that the global economic recovery is going to occur quicker than they originally forecast. And to put it in context for your viewers, Rowan, we are forecasting the Australian economy to have contracted by around 2.5% last year. That was in the MyEFO numbers. In comparison, Spain has seen their economy contract last year by around 11%, the UK by 10%, Italy and France by 9%, Japan, Germany, Canada more than 5%, and then the United States around 3.4%. That's what the IMF are forecasting. So Australia is in such a better position than those other countries to see the jobs come back and to see our recovery take hold.
And one of the things about jobs coming back, one of the things from the, I guess, the lessons of COVID are that we really need to rebuild our manufacturing in Australia, relying on Chinese supply chains, etc., etc. There is a need here. The Nationals have come out with an idea that we need that coal-fired power station in the Hunter to create jobs. We had a Nationals plan put forward yesterday saying we need, as well as gas, we also need coal to guarantee us that baseload power. This morning, Barnaby Joyce has come out and complained that the Nationals don't get a fair go in the coalition. This is after Dave Sharma, one of your colleagues, basically poo-pooed the Nationals' suggestion and said, no, the future is renewables. Barnaby Joyce is now complaining that the Nationals deserve a senior financial or trade or defence portfolio because they are not being adequately looked after by your side of the government, the Liberals. Do you agree with Barnaby Joyce's comments today, Josh?
Well, no, I don't. And obviously the Nationals under Michael McCormack have formed part of a successful coalition government, which has been led by Scott Morrison, and that has delivered not only government, but has also delivered for the Australian people through the first pandemic in more than a century and through the biggest economic shock since the Great Depression. And what we have seen with the Nationals is that not only did they hold all their seats at the last election, they actually increased their margins. And in the budget that I delivered last October, there were really significant programs and investments in regional Australia, whether it was in the tourism industry, whether it was with water infrastructure, whether it was in transport infrastructure, whether it was in the creation of jobs more broadly in telecommunications and health. And that has been welcomed by groups such as the National Farmers Federation. So the coalition is obviously vitally important. It's got a great track record of delivering for communities across the country, be they regional or be they in our cities, and long may that coalition continue.
Can we return manufacturing to this country at the same time as aiming to net zero emissions? Can renewables deliver us returning manufacturing to this country, Josh?
Well, we do have a manufacturing strategy which we outlined ahead of the budget, and the Prime Minister made an important speech at the National Press Club. And what that focus for the manufacturing strategy was key areas where we have a competitive advantage. So, for example, in resources and critical minerals, in energy, in medical device products, in food and agriculture, we have critical comparative advantages over other countries. And I think in the wake of COVID-19, many nations are having a look at their supply chains, and you will see more onshoring of manufacturing. We have a capacity here in Australia with a great skilled workforce to do more manufacturing, and that is definitely our focus, and that's where we put more than $1 billion of investment by the Morrison government into manufacturing so that we can create more jobs.
But can we reach net zero emissions and create these manufacturing jobs without new coal-fired or gas-fired plants?
Well, as you know, Rowan, our position on energy is technology, not taxes, and we outlined a technology investment roadmap. We've spoken about the significant role that gas plays, and as you know, gas is a fossil fuel, but it's a critical feedstock for manufacturing, but it's also a critical source of energy, and it's a reliable source of energy. Renewables have their role to play, and so does coal. What we are looking for is a portfolio of energy energy uses, but also a portfolio of energy supply, and that way we can ensure that we have a smaller carbon footprint but more affordable and reliable power. We're seeking triple objectives here, and of course all that means more jobs, and that's what our focus is.
And finally, Josh, Barnaby Joyce compares the Nationals and the Liberal parties as a marriage, and he uses lots of terms to do with marriage, but he complains that you're sitting next to the Prime Minister. It sounds like a couple of girls arguing at school over who sits next to the head girl. He's complaining that you're sitting next to the Prime Minister now, whereas it should be Michael McCormack. Are you going to move over and let Michael McCormack sit back next to the PM again?
Well, I don't take care of the sitting arrangements, but what we do know is there's one Deputy Prime Minister, and that's Michael McCormack, the leader of the Nationals, and he's done an outstanding job in that role. And we saw the result of his party's hard work and his leadership when he partnered with Scott Morrison at the last election, which saw a result which many of the pundits, many of the commentators sitting in your chair, Rowan, did not predict. When the coalition triumphed over. And Josh,
you will remember the one person who did predict it, who was sitting right here in this chair right now, who said all along Scott Morrison would be returned. Absolutely, and I'm now predicting that you're going to have an election later this year and you're going to be returned again. How accurate am I going to be, Josh?
Well, let me say, I'm not Nostradamus, and probably neither should you be, but what we do know is our focus is not on the timing of the election, is on delivering the recovery from COVID. And as I said earlier, Rowan, we are seeing some encouraging numbers, but the situation is very unpredictable. The global economic environment is very uncertain. The vaccine rollout is obviously critical, but there are a lot of other factors at play. So the road ahead will be long and hard, but the support measures that were put in place, including tax cuts, which are delivering more money into the pockets of Australian households, and the business investment incentives, which are going to be critical to lifting our productivity. All of that is important. And as I go around the country, whether it's in Western Sydney or in regional Australia, or indeed on the coast of Victoria, like at places like Torquay the other day, I've been visiting businesses that have graduated out of JobKeeper. 2 million fewer Australian workers and 450,000 fewer Australian businesses on JobKeeper in October compared to September. That's a very tangible sign of the recovery underway, whether it's in the cafes or whether it's in the homeware stores or whether it's in the restaurants and the bars, or even visited Cotton On, a company with 5,500 people on JobKeeper, but they're no longer relying on it because the customers have come back. So this is a really positive sign for your viewers and for the country more generally, that we are getting through COVID and that we can see a better future ahead.
Josh Frydenberg, our thoughts with your mum in particular on International Holocaust Remembrance Day and for all those sufferers of the Holocaust. Thank you so much for speaking to us today, and thank you on behalf of all those small businesses who you have helped through the COVID crisis with your policies. Josh Frydenberg, thanks so much for coming on Inside the News tonight. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Ron.